I used to think about food, I mean, if I had to put a percentage on it, I'd probably say 90% of the time I was either thinking about what I had eaten, what I was going to eat, what I could eat, that was important. And actually, to be honest, mixed in there was a lot of thinking about weight at the same time. Maybe you can relate to that. Because I used to look at other people, let's take an example, I'd be out for a meal. From what I could see, everyone else would be enjoying the meal, enjoying the company, chatting, and I'd be in my head thinking about the menu, thinking about what I could eat, thinking about what I wanted to eat, having loads of cravings. It didn't seem to matter if my stomach was physically full, if I was hungry, what time of day it was, what I was doing. My mind was pretty much always, one way or another, on food. And I hated it. And when I speak with clients, this seems to be a common theme there as well. But now, I don't think about food all the time. And I see it every single week, clients stopping thinking about food all the time and starting to think about food normally. So when I talk about this today with you, I'm talking about it from my personal experience. I'm also talking about the experience of my clients. Take what you want from it. It's not a prescription for you personally, but let's discuss this for what those experiences are worth. Let's say I finished up dinner and chilling, watching TV, and I'm thinking about food. So the first question I'd ask is, what food specifically am I thinking about? Because having cravings and wanting to go to the cupboard and just rampage it for chocolate and ice cream is different to me than thinking, hey, I could really go for a second portion of what I had for dinner. I actually don't mind what I have. So let's start with, okay, I don't mind what I have. I'm just thinking about food. I want to eat some more food. Maybe, and I know this is going to sound really, really obvious, maybe I'm actually still hungry. And you might think, well, I'm physically full, I can feel it in my stomach, I've had enough, it seems, so I can't possibly still be hungry. Now, because I struggled with food for so many years, I didn't trust that at all. I thought if I still wanted to eat, even though I was physically full, then that means that I was just being greedy and I was overeating. Now I think differently, and I trust my body that if it says, hey, you know, we're not satiated yet, we need a little bit more food, I'm like, okay. But I really recognize that that's easy for me to say now that I do trust my body and I'm weight stable and I can just go along with it. I have the evidence in place to make me feel comfortable doing that, if that makes sense. I've gone into great depth about that in another video when I talked about how listening to my body and following my appetite really helped me balance out my appetite. So I'll leave it linked down below as well. You can check it out if you're interested. Another really important thing that I've learned is that while I might have eaten enough that day, or what I considered to be enough, or what might be a normal amount of food for someone of my size, let's say, hunger and appetite can be cumulative, if that makes sense. So because I'd spent so long in a dieting frame of mind, in a restrictive frame of mind, going physically hungry, there was almost like this backlog of appetite that built up over time. So when I even tried to go from dieting to eating a normal amount of food, this didn't work for me because it was almost like I had this debt to pay appetite wise, and this really confused me for a long time because when I tried to eat a normal amount of food, I found that I was still really hungry, and I was thinking, well, that's evidence then that I'm just, you know, got a really high appetite naturally, or I'm obsessed with food or some sort of food addict, when in actuality I had something called extreme hunger, if you've heard of that term. From all of my dieting, from all of my restriction, my appetite was just higher than the average person's for a little while. The next thing is, maybe I was full but not satiated, as I just mentioned. So I used to volume eat a lot. So a dinner that I might have had in the past might have been volume-wise really quite substantial, but really heavy on the vegetables, which is great, but light on all of the elements of a meal that now make me satisfied, like flavor and having some fats in there and having some, you know, having lots of variety. These things weren't really there in my dieting and restricting days. So I would feel full often, but not satiated. So I'd finish a meal and I'd still be thinking about food. And I've spoken about this as well in one of my other videos, which I'll link down below for you. Okay, but let's say I'm satiated, I'm satisfied, physically full in this scenario, But I'm thinking about raiding the cupboard for all of the biscuits or all of the crisps or whatever the case may be. So I'm having cravings, essentially. Well, the first thing that I would ask is, have I been depriving myself of them? Have I put them in a, these are bad foods, these are going to make me gain weight, these are unhealthy, absolutely can't eat these, and never allow myself to have them? That was a really common theme. I was either completely avoiding certain foods, or I was craving them like mad and honoring those cravings and binge eating, essentially. And I know what you're thinking, well, I can't just take them off limits because I can't control myself around them and I just eat them all of the time, and they need to be placed off limits because I can't just have one small portion of them. That's part of the problem, right? Well, I completely hear you. And I've spoken about this a lot in another video. There's going to be so many links in this video, but it all ties together really nicely. Something which came up a lot when I was looking into, or when I was training to understand the psychology around eating, was essentially the idea of emotional eating, which is not how it first appears on the tin. So I used to think of emotional eating as, oh, well, I'm feeling a little bit sad and I don't really know how to deal with that, so I'm going to go to the shops and I'm going to buy some ice cream, Bridget Jones style, and I'm going to eat it, and that's going to make me feel better temporarily. Now, sometimes that is the case, but this wasn't my experience of it, which is why I didn't realize that I was an emotional eater until quite recently, actually. Not loads of emotional eating I was doing, but I was doing some and I didn't realize, and this is actually a really common theme with my clients as well. For me personally, one thing that would come up over and over again now that I look back in hindsight to make me think about food when I wasn't hungry, or let's say I wasn't restricting, I'd learned early on in my childhood to block out certain emotions with food, to the point that I'd done it so much and for so long that I didn't know that this was happening, because I didn't experience the emotion, I just experienced cravings and I experienced increased hunger. Absolutely fascinating. For me personally, this was anger. I've spoken about this in one of my other videos, which I'll link below. And what if instead we could learn how to process those emotions, validate those emotions, experience those emotions comfortably and appropriately? What if food has somewhere along the line become more than food? The meaning of food has surpassed just being about normal enjoyment and nourishment and socializing, and it's become something more than that. And an association has been made there that's so linked that we can't experience a certain situation without thinking about food. What if somewhere along the line food has become reward, has become comfort, has become distraction, has become entertainment? And these can be things that we learn in childhood. Let's say the food somewhere along the line has become closely linked with entertainment. Well, now I'm in a position where every time that I feel bored, which happens often throughout the day, well, now I'm thinking about food, because that's what food means to me. Let's say I get promoted and food is reward to me. I get promoted and now I'm thinking about food. Let's say I've had a good day and I want to celebrate that, and food is celebration to me. Well, now I'm thinking about food every time that I have a good day. And these are extreme examples, but I hope that you can see my point here. I mean, you can take it or leave it, but something that I do with clients is we go back, we go through the timeline of looking at food and we integrate this in. Did certain food meanings start to come about? And then we look for those patterns and see, is this still happening in day-to-day life? What if, and this was unbelievably true for me personally, and it's why I restricted for so long, and it's why I developed orthorexia. What if the way that I eat has become linked, very closely linked with my self-esteem? Not just linked, but for me personally, it became a very large part of how I gauged my self-worth. I know that it's really important to me how I'm feeling about myself, that if I've got this one measure, the way that I'm eating, that determines how I feel about myself, you can bet that I'm going to be thinking about it a lot and using it to modulate my self-esteem, whether it's through, hey, I hit a certain number of calories today, or hey, I ate really clean today, or I didn't. Now I've got all of this wrapped up in it, so I'm thinking about it all of the time. And let's talk about the elephant in the room. What if we're so body conscious so worried about weight, and we have the belief that I need to control my food and think about my food all the time in order to control my weight. And let's be honest, this is really, really, really common. I don't want to speak for you personally because there's no way that I could know, but I definitely believed this. And when this is tied to a fear, an intense fear of gaining weight, or a really intense desire to lose weight, to me that just left me in a position where of course I was thinking about food all the time. Now I know differently that that's not necessary in order to be a healthy weight and to maintain a healthy weight. But I didn't know that then. I didn't know what I know now about how weight is regulated. I didn't have the trust in my body to maintain a healthy weight all on its own through its own appetite regulation. And I don't want to make this video about that specifically, but essentially when I balanced out my appetite and I focused on satiation and I focused on nutrition in a positive way, but also flexibility, and eliminated the mental restriction, and I addressed the emotional blocking that I did with food and my emotional attachment to food. When I did all of that and through that started to become more of a normal eater, as it were, and had a peaceful and positive relationship with food, that's what allowed me to find and maintain a healthy weight without having to control my food in the way that I used to. And the last thing that I want to share with you guys is habit. We might just be in the habit of thinking about food all of the time for all of the reasons that I just mentioned, and because we can just program ourselves to think about food all the time. We might tie thinking about food or expecting to eat or wanting to eat to particular situations. Like I had a client that would always eat when she came home in order to de-stress. There's the emotional aspect to it. So when she came home every day, she was thinking about food because it was a habit. When I used to go and visit my mum, I would always binge eat, and that was an association that I built up with that place. So every time I would go and visit her, I'd be thinking about food and either trying not to binge eat, or I was binge eating because it was an association, it was a habit. That can be one thing that's going on, or it could just be a habit in the way that we think. So I trained myself, I programmed myself to think about food all of the time. But just as I programmed myself into it, I also programmed myself out of it. That's the beauty of our brains, is that we have that ability to do that. And this is one of the very big reasons why I'm now learning NLP, if you've heard of it, because a big part of NLP, which I find just fascinating, is learning how to program the way that we think for ourselves, choosing how we want to think, choosing how we want to act, and to deprogram out unhelpful thinking styles and unhelpful beliefs and unhelpful associations. But for today, that's all for today. I hope you found some inspirational help in this video, in our experiences, and I'll see you in the next one, guys. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.